My boyfriend ate all the jalapeno poppers I made before I even got one. I knew the night was supposed to be simple and comfortable. The kind of evening where you cook something you actually enjoy and then collapse onto the couch with your boyfriend to watch a movie. Because that's what people our age do when they're trying to save money and pretend that adulthood isn't swallowing them whole. I had spent the last hour making dinner for both of us. Not anything complicated or fancy, but something warm and filling. And I added jalapeno poppers as a little appetizer because I hadn't had them in forever and the craving hit so hard it practically shoved me into the kitchen. I made 8 of them, a small batch, but more than enough for 2 people to share. When we finally sat down on the couch, plates balanced on our laps, and the movie barely starting, I was still adjusting myself, shifting pillows around and pulling my blanket closer because I like being comfortable before I start eating. And I thought it was obvious that the poppers were for both of us, especially since I had cooked all of it and placed it right between us. I wasn't paying attention to how fast he was eating, partly because the room felt peaceful and partly because I didn't think I needed to. But over the next 15 minutes, I started noticing the plate getting emptier every time I glanced over, until eventually there was nothing left except crumbs and the faint smell of fried jalapenos. When I reached for the plate and realized it was completely empty, my stomach dropped into this weird mix of surprise and disappointment that hit harder than I wanted to admit. And I asked him why he didn't leave me any, because it honestly hadn't occurred to me that I needed to claim food I had made for the both of us. He looked at me like I was asking something unusual and said that I didn't say I wanted any, which made my brain stall for a second because how could anyone think that the person who cooked the meal didn't intend to eat the appetizer too? I tried to explain that it bothered me not because I was obsessed with jalapeno poppers, but because the whole situation felt thoughtless and inconsiderate in a way that made something small feel suddenly heavy. Instead of apologizing or even acknowledging what I was saying, he told me I was overreacting and that they were just snacks and he was hungry. And the tone in his voice made it sound like my feelings were unnecessary background noise he didn't need to listen to. The thing that stuck with me wasn't the missing poppers, because food disappears and people get hungry, but the way he dismissed how I felt without even stopping to think about why I brought it up. I kept replaying it in my head, wondering if maybe I was the one being dramatic. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like this tiny moment was exposing something else. Something about how he doesn't always consider me unless I spell everything out for him like instructions on a box. And that's what made me write the post in the first place, because it wasn't really about the food. It was about wondering if this was just a careless moment or a glimpse into a pattern I had been trying not to see. After I posted the situation online and reread what I had written, I started to realize how strange it felt, that something as small as 8 jalapeno poppers had taken up this much space in my head, yet the more I replayed the moment, the heavier it sat on my chest, almost like the poppers weren't the issue at all, but the way the whole thing made me feel invisible in my own relationship. I tried to shake it off and remind myself that people make dumb mistakes without meaning anything by them. But every time I thought about how casually he told me I was overreacting, something inside me twisted in a way that didn't feel like something you could just laugh off. I kept thinking about how easy it would have been for him to notice what he was doing while he was eating them one after another, because it wasn't like he ate 2 and waited or hesitated or checked in with me. He just kept going until the plate was wiped clean, and I couldn't ignore how symbolic that felt. Almost like the physical version of him taking up all the space without noticing or caring that I might want any of it too. It made me wonder how many other moments like that had slipped past me because I brushed them aside, telling myself he was tired or stressed or distracted, instead of acknowledging that maybe he sometimes just doesn't think about me unless I put a spotlight on my needs. The more I thought about the conversation afterward, the more the part where he said I didn't tell him I wanted any kept echoing in my mind, because it felt like a strange rule book I didn't realize I was supposed to follow. Like I needed to announce and label every basic expectation as if I were dealing with a roommate instead of someone I loved and had been with for almost 2 years. It bothered me that he didn't stop to say even something as simple as, "Oh, my bad, I wasn't thinking," because that tiny bit of acknowledgement would have softened the whole thing instantly. And instead, he basically told me my feelings weren't worth considering because they didn't match how he saw the situation. I'm not someone who likes picking fights or making drama out of small issues, and I've always tried to be the kind of girlfriend who communicates calmly instead of letting things pile into resentment. But his reaction made me question whether communicating with him even mattered, because it felt like he had already dismissed the whole thing before I even finished telling him how it made me feel. That part scared me more than the empty plate ever could, because the idea of being with someone who shrugs off your feelings the moment they become inconvenient is the kind of slow, subtle problem that doesn't ruin a relationship overnight, but erodes it one tiny, inconsiderate moment at a time. I kept asking myself whether I was looking too deeply into this, but something in me knew that moments like this don't bother you unless a part of you already feels unheard, and maybe this was just the first time I couldn't pretend it didn't matter. What really started getting to me later that night wasn't the argument itself, but the strange quiet that settled afterward. This heavy kind of silence where you pretend everything is normal, even though the air feels slightly warped, like the temperature in the room has shifted in a way only you can feel. He went back to watching the movie like nothing had happened, completely unfazed, while I sat there trying to act the same, even though my thoughts were crawling all over each other, trying to make sense of why such a small moment had left such a deep sting. I kept sneaking glances at him, hoping maybe he would look over and read something on my face that made him pause long enough to say, "Hey, I'm sorry." But he never did. And the longer I waited, the more obvious it became that the apology wasn't coming. It felt strange because I'm used to him being playful and considerate in so many ways, yet this time he seemed locked in his own bubble, almost like he didn't even notice that something had shifted. I could feel the distance growing in tiny, invisible inches, and I hated that I could feel it at all, because I didn't want this to be the kind of thing that made me second-guess everything. Yet, the more he acted like nothing was wrong, the clearer it became that he didn't sense the shift because it didn't affect him in the same way. He was comfortable, I was uneasy, and that gap between those two feelings felt bigger than the empty plate sitting on the coffee table. At one point, he laughed at something in the movie and nudged me the way he always does, and I forced myself to smile back, but inside, it felt like I was borrowing an expression I didn't fully own in that moment, because all I could think about was how easily he brushed off something that mattered to me. It wasn't that he didn't know how I felt, it was that he didn't seem to care enough to sit in the discomfort with me long enough to talk it out. That realization landed harder than the initial disappointment, because it made me wonder how many times I had smoothed things over for him without even noticing. I tried to remind myself of all the good moments between us, the inside jokes, the late-night talks, the small acts of affection that had made me fall for him in the first place. But even those memories felt complicated in the moment, almost like they belonged to a version of us that hadn't been tested by these tiny cracks that slowly form when one person stops paying attention. It scared me in a very quiet way, the kind of fear that doesn't make you cry or panic, but makes you sit very still, like you're waiting to see what version of your relationship shows up next. By the time the movie ended, I still hadn't resolved anything in my head, and when he kissed me goodnight, I went along with it because the familiarity was comforting, but the thought lingered that something about us felt slightly misaligned, like a picture on the wall that looks straight until you really look at it. And even though I kept telling myself I might be overthinking all of this, there was a part of me that wished I wasn't the only one doing the thinking at all. The next morning, everything felt strangely normal on the surface, which somehow made the unsettled feeling grow even louder inside me, because he moved around the apartment with this easy confidence, humming while he made coffee and scrolling on his phone like the night before had been completely uneventful. I watched him from the doorway and tried to decide whether I should bring it up again or let it slide. But the longer I hesitated, the more I realized that I wasn't actually afraid of another argument. I was afraid of that same dismissiveness happening again, that same feeling of being talked over and brushed aside, as if my emotions were optional accessories he could choose to acknowledge only when convenient. He asked if I slept okay, and I answered automatically, even though part of me wanted to ask him how he thought I could have slept well when he had eaten the entire appetizer I made for both of us and then acted like I was dramatic for caring. Instead, the words stayed locked in my mouth because I didn't want the conversation to devolve into another round of "you're overreacting." And I didn't want to give him the chance to make me feel silly for caring about something that represented so much more than food. The silence between us wasn't hostile, but it felt heavy in a way that made me hyper-aware of the smallest things, like the way he didn't look up from his phone, or the way he didn't notice that I lingered in the doorway longer than usual. As the day went on, I kept replaying the moment when I posted online, wondering why I needed strangers to tell me whether I was allowed to feel hurt, and the answer that kept rising to the surface was uncomfortable but honest. I asked them because I didn't trust him to take my feelings seriously. That realization made my chest tighten, because I had always believed communication should feel safe with the person you love, yet lately it felt like I needed to cushion my words like fragile glass, afraid that any crack in the delivery would give him permission to ignore the message underneath. I found myself thinking about all the small gestures that make a relationship feel balanced. Things like splitting the last fry, offering the last bite, handing over the fluffier blanket, or saving the first sip of something you know the other person loves. Those things aren't about food or blankets, they're about paying attention. They're about noticing someone else's existence in your shared space. They're about seeing beyond your own hunger or comfort or impatience. And it hit me that last night, he hadn't just eaten all the poppers, he had taken the whole moment and never even thought to leave space for me. By evening, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore, because pretending nothing bothered me would only make the distance grow until it became something harder to name. So I sat him down and told him, in the calmest voice I could manage, that I didn't care about the appetizer itself, but about the way he reacted, the way he dismissed my feelings instead of even trying to understand them. I told him I needed someone who notices, someone who pauses, someone who cares enough to question how their actions affect me. He looked confused at first, almost startled that something so small could mean something bigger. And I realized that this conversation would decide whether he was willing to meet me halfway or whether I would keep shrinking my feelings to make room for his comfort. I didn't know what his answer would be, but I knew I needed to hear it because I was done convincing myself that being overlooked was normal. I deserved to be considered. I deserved to be chosen, even in the tiny moments that most people never notice at all.